Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Untethering Shame podcast, the podcast where we embark on a journey of healing and liberation from shame. I'm your host, Kyira Wackett, and today we're talking about the inner child, the hot topic many of us have started to hear more about on social media and in the wellness world. So my guest and I wanted to provide a little more context to exactly what that means when we're talking about it. Joining me is Cassandra Johnson, a visionary in the realm of healing from inherited trauma. Cassandra's own journey led her to unravel the threads of trauma patterns, connecting with her inner child and discovering the profound role of fantasy in the healing process. Cassandra's story is a testament to resilience. From a childhood marked by abuse, she found solace in a world of fantasy, a sanctuary for her wounded soul. As an adult, she embarked on a journey of inner healing, recognizing the universal truth that many children of trauma turn to escapism as a means of survival. Through her journey, Cassandra birthed Cassandra Flora Designs, a beacon of hope and transformation for those navigating the labyrinth of inherited trauma. Her work illuminates the path towards reclaiming our inner child, restoring our fractured connection to self, and embracing the power of imagination as a tool for healing. Today, Cassandra and I will delve into the depths of trauma, exploring the intricate dance between our past wounds and our present selves. We'll unravel the mystery of what severs our connection to our inner child and the pivotal role of fantasy in our healing journey. So, listeners, I invite you to do whatever you can to center yourself in being in this space, here and now. Get rid of distractions, put yourself in a position that you are ready to explore with curiosity, and let's dive in. Cassandra, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been super pumped about our conversation ever since we met, and we'll get to this for sure, our slight geek out, but also bonding over Harry Potter in very real ways and sort of connected to trauma and all of our levels. And so I think there's the part of me that just also wants to just sit here and talk about Harry Potter for, 45 minutes. But knowing where we're going, I'm just so excited. And so before we dive in, I love to start every episode just doing a one-word check-in. So I'm curious if you could describe how you're feeling right now using one word. What would it be?
Excited.
Say more.
Well, I was out of town for 3 weeks. I was in Mexico for some personal things, and I realized all these different ways that I need to change the way that I structured my business and the way that I spread the message of what I'm really doing. And I'm just really excited for what's going to come. I'm bringing up some really, really cool things that I think are going to help a lot of people.
Oh, that's awesome. I think it's really cool too So I've had my own business for 10 or 11 years now. And it started off as art/speaking. I had to have an LLC because I was selling enough art that I had to claim it, taxes. And then I was like, I think I want to do this speaking thing. And I was also getting my master's. And then my speaking kind of started to take over more. And then I was like, gosh, I really like this. I want to go more in this route. And then realizing my business was called Kinda Creative. And so again, great art name, loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And with K's and playing off my name, not great for the mental health side of what I was doing, but I kept it for a really long time. Eventually, the January of 2020, before COVID started Adversity Rising. Basically it was oh, these need two umbrellas. But I was still going through all these iterations of how do I help? What does helping look like? What's the truest form of help from my lens, what I can offer at the level that I know I'm capable of and in my wheelhouse. And the tricky part, I think, when you're starting a business is you have the pressure to do it all and to achieve and succeed at a very rapid rate. And I think social media and sort of the influencer idea really dramatizes that for us. But what happens is, and I did this both as an artist and from the wellness side, is I started I started painting what would sell instead of what brought me joy. And I started designing the courses that other people were telling me they wanted. They weren't even fucking signing up for them. There was just like, no, you need to do this. And what about this? And have these events. And that's too expensive. Can you do this cheaper thing so I can do it? And I would do all these things. And I was just basically, I had like 15 open buckets of things I was doing, none of which were really bringing me joy or speaking to my truth. And then making that decision of my art is mine. It's no longer for sale. I need to take that off. I need to be bold enough to be like, I don't want to paint for the money. Not that I was going to become rich on it anyways, but just realizing it wasn't allowing me to be who I wanted to be. But then in my other side of business, realizing you have to dare to create the business that you're excited to lead that helps heal you and whoever that target person, that sort of fictional character in our head that we are trying to show up and support is, and not getting sideswept by what everyone else is doing. So it sounds like you're going through that right now of realizing how you want to help, what you want to do. Creating a business that's in alignment with that is about making these shifts, and then it's allowing that excitement to come to the forefront.
Absolutely. It's really great that you mentioned all that because it's a common thing with business owners and startups and entrepreneurs. You follow all the shoulds and you follow everyone's advice, but why?
Right.
That
Right.
if it's already been done, don't do it. What do you want to do? And it's about finding, and while you can't always reinvent the wheel, you have your own unique approach to it, whether it's mental health or speaking or art. And, a lot of business coaches will tell you finding your ideal client, finding your ideal audience. But a big part of that is staying really true to what resonates with you and what aligns with you. It will reach your right audience eventually. And that's the hardest part. But once you get there, it's so nice.
Yes.
And instead of being unidentifiable because you're constantly trying to match the ideas of other people that aren't your ideal client.
Right.
There's somebody else out there that'll appeal to them.
Exactly. And let them appeal to them and be that person. I think that element of I would rather have 3 clients that I'm really excited to work with that we're doing the type of work that I'm not only incredibly skilled at doing, but I connect to on the deepest level that I'm able to show up and give 100,000% to and really help and support them versus get 50 clients that I'm doing something that feels like I'm on the surface and doesn't feel like it's really lining up with what I want to do. And so okay, and I'm curious now, kind of thinking about that. Again, you and I fall under, I think, the same umbrella. We're working with people. My niche is really shame, radical acceptance. You've talked a lot about inherited family trauma and really thinking about trauma recovery. Both of those places are going to kind of require some of the same stops along the way. And I think the route and the methods that we use to get there are so distinctly different. And I love even just in your intro and learning about what you do, you talk a lot about the inner child and how the inner child has to be a part of the conversation if we are going to heal from our own trauma, from the inherited trauma that we have, break out of these interpersonal dynamics. That being said, I think that's a big part of your niche. That is this huge piece that people aren't necessarily talking about. And I think a lot of people that hear it either dismiss it because it feels like you're going to be like Freud talking to them about some weird early childhood obsession with mom thing, or they don't know, or they're scared, or they've really built their survival out of only moving forward. They just have to outrun their trauma fast enough. And so I'm curious, can you tell us what is the inner child and why is that the stake that you're really founding a lot of your work on that we need to be talking about?
It's a really good question. That was a huge part of my healing journey. I did the outrunning thing for a long time and it caught up to me and it was really brutal. It literally caused me to have such a physically violent and emotionally violent attack that it actually kind of reset my brain, which was a really interesting experience. And I've never heard of that happening before, but I'm really fortunate for it. But it gave me the opportunity to sort of reapproach things. And a practice that I kept hearing from different healing and different meditation practices and stuff like that was to go and address your inner child. And I thought a lot about the lackings I felt in my life. And so like where I felt a lot of loss was around the fact that I didn't have parents. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of resentment to my parents for not being my parents, for not being there for me. You know, I'd see people around and I was like, you know, they can go to their parents for help and I can't do that. I don't trust my parents. My parents don't care for me. They don't love us. They're abusive. They're just bad people, you know? And, I think a big part of letting go of that was accepting the fact that parents are human. They're not perfect, and we tend to want to make them perfect because as we grow up, they're the one thing we're learning from. But becoming your own adult, you realize that, you know, they're just people and they're just doing their best, and it's not always right, just like we all make mistakes, and just kind of understanding their shortcomings in that. And then recognizing that I am also that. I am also that adult. So why am I relying on this person that I don't trust to be my parent when I'm a grown woman and I can be my own? And so taking that control was really, really important for me. And so I started going back in my mind to those memories of getting hurt as a child. And I would go in and I'd see her, and I see her clear as day. I still do it today. I go in there and I just pick her up off the floor crying in a ball, and I just pull her into a big hug. And I allow my inner child to feel the safety from myself, which has been it's a lot of visualization, but it's really powerful to open up to yourself and then just acknowledging your inner child. You know, we spend so much time as children being completely helpless. We're completely vulnerable to people around us and the things around us. We have zero control. And then you become an adult and all of a sudden you're thrown into the real world and you're on your own and you're forced to be an adult. There's never a time where you're actually encouraged to acknowledge the control you have over your own life now. You spend all your time working 9 to 5s and going to college and bad boyfriends and bad girlfriends and bills and children and responsibility. Next thing you know, you have your own kids. You don't know what the hell you're doing because you didn't even take care of yourself. Your inner child is still inside, hurt, unattended to, unacknowledged. And it comes up. And it comes up in the way that you parent. It comes up in the way that you have relationships. It comes up in your own mental health. And a lot of people they forget that they're there, but they are. I think a lot of people feel a lot of imposter syndrome with that too, right? Because as kids, especially like a generational thing, I'm in my early 30s. Growing up, we were very much of the generation where our parents told you, you don't cry, you don't do any of this stuff. You know, one of my dad's famous lines was, if you want to cry, I'll give you something to cry about. And I was like, well, you gave me the first thing to cry about. But he was letting me know he could hurt me more. And so it really taught me this idea that like, just stop complaining. It's not that big of a deal, you know? And then like people would see the bruises and they'd be like, well, you're overreacting. And then some people wouldn't. But there's a lot of, you know, people who think that way. It's an older generation where they like push it down, and you wouldn't see that now. If I was a child now dealing with this stuff, it would have gotten a lot more attention, but it was just the time that it was.
It's interesting just thinking about what you're describing too, which is, so one, it sounds like everyone has an inner child. Your relationship with that inner child is the thing that we can work on. But there isn't this just like, well, I don't have that, because you are still in a relationship with all the other versions of you at different points in your life. And if we turn inward, it sounds like a big thing that you're saying is, for some of us that have maybe big T trauma that we've named, that we've talked about, we might be able to more easily pinpoint certain moments where maybe that inner child is feeling lost, unseen, broken, like they're the problem. And really, all of us have that. There is this sort of universal feeling. It's just maybe the acuity, the depth, the frequency that you felt it. But all of us have some version of our past self that has felt unseen, unsafe, unsupported. And so that work, it sounds like, is really about being comfortable enough to go back to that part of yourself to acknowledge, it sounds like, both what you're feeling, but then also to help it not feel that way. Is that right?
I mean, I think it's a lot about giving yourself the permission to feel that way.
Mm.
We grow up being told you're not supposed to feel these things and it's not that big of a deal, but it is. And like, you didn't have to be beat up by your father like I
Right.
was for you to benefit from this. That,
Right.
like, I feel like a lot of people who've experienced any kind of trauma, whether it was bullying or from kids at school, or maybe you
Yeah.
had an eating disorder, maybe you're just depressed, maybe your parents were divorced and they didn't listen to you. I mean, there's so many different levels. And a lot of people, that's why I don't get into the nitty gritty of my story, because people start to think, well, I wasn't beaten up by my parents, so
Right. They
I don't
compare
have a
their
right.
story. Yeah, exactly.
It's not comparable. Pain is pain, and
Yeah.
childhood is childhood. And like, you're still in this very vulnerable developing state as a child, and whatever you're absorbing, it affects all the rest of it. So it's really important, no matter what you experience, even if you had the best childhood ever, not every day was perfect. It's important to go back and address that child inside of you, because that part of you doesn't die. It lives on with you.
That's so interesting, because I think that part of me, I mean, this is, if I put my therapist hat on, I can be like, yes, we need to validate, we need to grieve, we need to, all those things. But then I also go to, if I take that hat off and I go to, well, what is my natural instinct? I want to fix it and make it go away. So when you think about even the inner child, it's like, I know I can't change what happened, but my brain goes to, okay, name it. Yeah, validate it, but then make that go away, make that pain go away. And it sounds like what you're saying is, no, actually, that's not really the goal. The goal is for you, now that you're in this parent position, what this means,
Mm-hmm.
again, when we're saying inner child, is you now go in as the adult and provide that validation, that seeing, that comfort, that whether it was your parents, other caregivers, a teacher, whoever it was, didn't and wasn't able to afford you at that time. And so we're
Right.
essentially kind of reparenting ourselves in those moments by not making it go away, but just allowing it to exist, so that instead of, I think about almost like Inside Out, all the balls, like the memories and how they get integrated. I think about trauma as sort of this ball that never got integrated. It's just like smashing you in the side of the face always. Like, I'm still here, I'm still here, I'm still
Mm-hmm.
here. And for some of us, it's obvious, some of it's not. But the idea, it sounds like, is by actually being willing to go back and face it, and to be incredibly uncomfortable in the vulnerability of that, because now you're doing something that you've conditioned yourself not to do for protection, for whatever.
Mm-hmm. Survival.
Yeah, it allows that part of you to not feel so consuming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely creates a lot of trust within yourself, which is really
Mm.
powerful in your healing. I'm not a very like woo-woo person.
Yeah.
I've tried meditating and I've tried all the different things, and I can't quite get there. I'm a very literal and
Mhm.
practical person. And I'm not going to BS you. You can't erase what happened.
Right.
That's stupid. It doesn't exist. I don't agree when people say that, because it gives false hope. Because I also think whenever people say like, oh, you can erase these things, like, no, now you're setting this person up to feel like a failure for not
Mhm.
being able to do this, because you can't erase things from time and from history.
Right.
You can heal past them, but you can't erase them. So I think it's important for people to more so take the opportunity to add, instead of trying to erase or run away from something. Instead of running away from it and suppressing it or trying to erase it and constantly failing, how about you just add to it?
Mm.
Which is where I came up with the idea of the fantasy designs.
I love this. This is where I think my shift would be, now we're talking radical acceptance. We're talking about accepting what you can control, releasing what you can't, and then really owning your story in the parts that you can control. And so this is where you split into the fantasy side. So tell us about that. What does that mean? How does that show up in the context of this work and the healing?
So I like to use myself as an example.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a child, the best form of escapism that I had were books and movies, especially Harry Potter, which so many kids have related to that. Who doesn't dream of getting away from their crummy household and going off to a magical place and having magical powers? And for me, as a little girl, the only thing I could imagine that's stronger than a full-grown ex-military man, the physical strength of a man beating up children, is magic. And so that was definitely my escapism. And as an adult, I actually have my own Harry Potter themed room in my house. And it's not gimmicky. It's not full of collectibles that are thousands of dollars. I don't resonate with that. It just feels like I'm going to shop at that point. I do really immersive spaces, so it feels like you're in the book. So my Harry Potter room has black walls, vintage Persian rugs, jewel-toned velvet, huge wingback chairs with vintage wood tables and books everywhere and candles and the LED candles from the ceiling with a wand and handmade potion bottles and a custom-made broom that I made, things like that, just to make you feel like you're in that space. And having the ability to, first of all, be creative like that and bring these things that I had visualized as a child to life with my own hands is really powerful. But anytime that I started to feel overwhelmed or something, I could go and sit in that room and just be creative. It's where I came up with a lot of my business ideas also. It's where I would de-stress. And I wasn't the only one using it. When my dog felt overwhelmed, he would go in there and lay down in there. And when my boyfriend was feeling a little stressed, he would go sit in there. And there's so many things to look at, and there's so many colors. And I was very purposeful with the types of colors I use, with like the psychology of colors. And another common thing is people think that it has to be really, really expensive to do, and it's not. I pulled off my room for $350.
Well, and it sounds like what you're describing is, again, you and I can both relate to using Harry Potter. And I think I honestly I'm sure I had this thought, but I never actually made the connection that he's literally escaping shitty caregivers. Like, I recognize that they were not great, but I never really made that connection as to why that's even more powerful for so many people. So there's that. But I think the idea of, for me, night times were hard. And I had some traumatic experiences that happened at night, but I had also that's when my brain would run. And so sometimes I still struggle with this as an adult. And I think this is a lot of what you talk about is when we haven't healed from some of those things, and or just embracing the reality of our brains and bodies are different after we experience trauma. We can't, like you said, we can't undo that. And so knowing, my husband and I, in a very kind-hearted way, joke now. He was an emergency medicine physician. He can't come home in the middle of the night without me jumping out of bed. Like, I startle as if the house is being broken into every time, even though I know he's working and he's the one coming home and I can go back to bed. But my startle reflex is very intense. And so all these little things. And so at night, sleep was always really hard for me because my brain, I think, just was overstimulated by painful things. And I was raised by my grandma. And so very much that generation of like, yeah, we don't really talk about it much, or we don't really have the language. And she really did try. And this is if we, go another step deeper and we talk about inherited family trauma. She was also a product of someone else telling her to stuff her emotions, who was a product of someone else. And so this has been this generationally passed down idea of just figure out how to move forward. And so Harry Potter was very much, I could go there and I could become a part of that world. Like, I was always an accessory character. I never wanted to be somebody in there, but it was the same, like you said, with movies, with anything else. You could just be an extra in it even. And that just felt good. It felt nice to be a part of something different, and you got to write that story. And I think the key part is it did give you a sense of control as you were doing that. Even though the story was written for you, you could kind of write yourself into it. And so it sounds like for you, you couldn't stop those things from happening. And when you were little, you didn't have the support or tools or skills to do anything other than just try to survive in those moments, which is what I think so many people have to do, adults and children, and then they shame themselves for it. I should have done this. I should have done this. I should have said this. I should have told someone. The reality is that your body goes into fight, flight, or freeze when you go through any sort of trauma, and it is just trying to survive in the moment. And for you, the fantasy was a way that you could move through the day because you couldn't predict anything else except for that there was a predictability that you could go and you could be in this world that you felt safe and you felt powerful or whatever it was. Is the reason now, because it sounds like it still works for you. Like, do you think it's a matter of, for all of us, it's creating the opportunity to immerse ourselves in different places? Or do you think that the reason it works for you is because it worked for you then? Does that make sense? Kind of what I'm asking?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. You can only try, right?
Right.
And I know that not everybody resonates to books or fantasy, and that's why I like to keep it very open. It can be a matter of colors and textures that bring you a sense of safety. It could be a song, a type of music that you really resonated with and escaped into when you were younger, art, things like that. And you can bring in those elements into your space. So it doesn't just have to be Harry Potter, right?
Right.
And while it's a common one, Harry Potter's a common one, I also, I had other ones. I loved Matilda. I loved Lord of the Rings. Those were huge ones for me. I also really loved Winnie the Pooh. And like when I still watch Winnie the Pooh, if I watch it this day, I'll start crying. My boyfriend took me for our anniversary to the Disney Cirque du Soleil show, and I cried multiple times just seeing the princesses and seeing the storyline. And, so some of that stuff really touches deep. So like there's little things from your childhood that really hit home for everybody. And it doesn't have to be, Harry Potter. It doesn't have to be fantasy. Mine was. And I think it's important that people understand that this is just a tool in your toolbox. This is just an environment. This is one step of taking that control over your life, right? This is a really good way to exercise that ability of controlling your surroundings, having the ability to paint your wall, having the ability to choose your furniture. It's like it's a very physical thing, but it's an exercise. It's a practice of it. And we can tell ourselves over and over again that we have control, but until we actually exercise it, it doesn't really sink in. So it's a form of exercising that ability.
Well, I like too, because, basically to string it together, we started with this idea of the inner child is any part of you from your childhood or your developing years, we'll say, that, it's all of you, but then there are parts of the inner child. There's these spots you need to go back to and just honor and validate and bring them into the story so they don't feel like they're being othered by you in the same way that they felt othered at that time too, by whoever it was, whatever was going on. So that's sort of part one, is just even identifying that you have these experiences, going back and naming them. And then it sounds like what you're doing is then you're also honoring the inner child for how it moved through those painful experiences. And so in your case, it was fantasy. You mentioned music. I think about, gosh, how many kids, how many teens is music something that saves their life in so many ways, and it becomes this place that they can connect. And so, and there's other forms and places too. And so recognizing that part of then what you do after you're sort of naming and validating is then celebrating and honoring. And then it sounds like that third piece is going, and now that we're here in adulthood, one, we recognize that we have a sense of control that we didn't have then. And so we're exercising that both by kind of showing up for our past selves, but also recognizing that we get to change the rest of the story. My guess is that what you're doing in that spot, and in addition to helping people think about their physical space and how they can design a space to support that, whether it's bringing that calm, allowing their own self-expression to show up. Maybe they lived in a home where they never got to pick anything that they had, or even just choosing what they want to wear now and being able to say, gosh, you never got to do that. You get to choose this. Let's not be influenced by what everybody else says is on trend. And let's think about what makes you feel good when you put it on. And so there's this element. My guess is the other piece that goes along with that then is also some, again, maybe radical acceptance of controlling. You still are going to feel some of those things in different ways because this is still like, this is the you that got through it. So some of those patterns are now in you. So we also have to show up for the future self and the present self to realize this is still going to show up. And this space is one way we can help you be recentered, but there's also more work internally we need to do to bring that compassion, that awareness, and break those patterns over time.
Absolutely. It's not easy to heal from things like that. And we shouldn't act like it is. It's a whole path, and you're always changing, so your methods have to change. But if you think back to, just to put it simply, as a child, you dealt with this in this way, whether it was your imagination or whatever. Let's say it was your imagination. As an adult, now you've brought that imagination out of your head into your house that you have and you have control over. So when something like that comes up again or something new, you don't have to escape into your head because you have it in your house. And there's something really powerful about that. And I think it frees up some mental space also, because now you're not escaping into your imagination. You get to sit in it, and now you get to actually process what you're going through because you're an adult and you have the tools to process your emotions and fears and things like that. Definitely opens up your capabilities more, which is also you taking control as an adult. Because as a kid, you can't even process your emotions. You can't process what's happening. Now you can.
Right. Well, and I'm curious, do you run into this with people? Because, my guess is there's shame from a few different lenses. So one, there's the shame that we've had of, I don't want to acknowledge the pain that I've had. Either I think it's not that big of a deal. Again, the stories we've told ourselves, I should be fine by now. Why is this still bothering me? So we carry shame about that. But the other lens, I remember I used to feel this way a lot, which is I don't want people to know my story because I actually don't want them to see me different. I feel like they're going to treat me different, but also the lens will shift. It's going to be a lens of pity, a lens of like, I want them to view me as strong. And I think I had some reverse parts as I got older where I almost rebelled against myself. And then I only wanted people to know about that because then I think I was also like starved for some validation that things were a problem. So I swung on both ends of the unhealthy spectrum of how I've engaged with my trauma experiences. But I think for a lot of people, there's this shame about their past. There's this shame about going back and feeling it for whatever story they have. But my guess is there's also this, you're asking people to be really vulnerable. You mentioned like your boyfriend liking your Harry Potter room. It's also very vulnerable to share with other adults some of these things because we've told ourselves that's childlike, that's dumb, that's silly, that's a fantasy. There's people listening to this right now that even though you've clarified, it doesn't have to be like this sort of kitschy thing. Doesn't look like a shop. We're not buying all the things. It's creating an experience that can be done in any way, however you would put your room together. You still have to share that with somebody else. And I know sometimes people can feel like, one, I shouldn't need that. Two, someone's going to judge me. Like if I wanted to make a Harry Potter room, as much as I know my husband wouldn't make fun of me and wouldn't judge me, there's still a part of me that is convinced that he would, even if it's not based in reality, because it feels juvenile. It feels like I should, again, be over it. And that's like really childish and dumb, and you should hide that away. And so I'm curious if that ever comes up for you with clients and how you help them through that.
Yeah. Is it childish? Yeah. So.
Right.
So
right.
what?
I suppose. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you kind of have to, I went through the same thing where I would share too much. Like I didn't share anything. And then people didn't understand like what my thing was. They're like, there's something off about you. Like, what's wrong with you? And then you share and then they look really like uncomfortable.
Yeah, like a deer in the headlights. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they pity you and they're scared of you. And like, that was really hard. So then I started like having a lot of trust issues. I'm like, okay, well, it took me a long time to open up to you. You're right. When you have a space like that, that is a reflection of your imagination. When you have people in that space, you are letting them into your mind.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important, though, that you have the ability to do that. And here's why. As people who've experienced trauma, we tend to create an outer shell for safety and survival. It's very normal, which
Mm-hmm.
keeps people on the outside. Part of your healing journey should include eliminating toxic people from your life and only having pure people who add to your life and you add to theirs.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being very intentional about who's in your life. So then when you have those right people and you bring them into your imagination and your space like that, maybe your husband will giggle a little and be like, oh, this is silly, but you're going to see it in his face. My boyfriend never watched Harry Potter before me. He didn't. He's like, oh, she's obsessed with it. She's obsessed with it.
Yeah.
He's obsessed with it now, first of all. But when I told him, I was like, I'm going to do a Harry Potter room in the house. And it was dead center in the house. Like, you couldn't go through the house without walking through it. It was our dining room. I took our dining room, didn't make it a dining room, and I made it a Harry Potter room. So you had to walk through it. But he didn't participate in putting it together. But one day it was done and he walked in. So it was my project. And he walked in and he was looking around and you could just see all of the wonder because it is a magical space, and it started to really spark things for him. And he would just naturally go in there and he would just look around. And then I'd hear him on his video games talking to his friends being like, yeah, she built this really cool Harry Potter room. Like, you guys should see it. And then I'd have guests over, I'd have friends over, and people would go in the room and they're just, oh, wow. Like, can I play with the wand? And they're like looking at everything. And we had like personalized photos that we had done. I did like a photo shoot so we could do like graduation photos. So Michael's is Slytherin and mine is Gryffindor. And we have our cloaks up on the wall. And it's really fun because then people want to get involved because it is fun, because no one caters to their inner child. But you had the courage to do that. Everybody secretly wants to cater to that. So then they're really drawn to it. And they're like, this is really cool. Whenever people hear like, oh, a Harry Potter room, they picture something gimmicky, especially being in Orlando. We live next to Universal. Yeah. But then you come in there and it feels like you fell into the book and you're just like, whoa. And people are just totally, and it's so simply done in a way that it flows with your house, but it's still, because it's still a room in a house. It's just a room in a house in one of the characters from Harry Potter, right? I always like picture like Sirius Black and like a little bit of Snapeness to it.
Yeah.
But like the warmth and like because there's still a lot there, but the darkness and the moodiness, and I did like faux stained glass windows that matched the windows in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, with the mermaids on it and stuff. And it changed the color, the lighting in the room. It was always a little bit moodier, so it felt like you were kind of in London. And when it rained, it was perfect. And it's really cool, the little things you can do to kind of transport yourself. And people want to experience that with you. And then they start getting curious, and then everyone wants to hang out in there. And no, don't be afraid to be the imaginative person of the group, because everyone needs it. And you'll find that you're helping a lot more people by providing that.
I love that. I think two things basically is, one, what a gift you can give yourself to learn how to intentionally take down that shell, to honor that you had it and that you needed it during that period of time. There was nothing wrong with having it. It's internal family systems. It's this idea of integrating this part and realizing we don't need that part to be driving anymore. And so how do you do the work to start to safely take that down? Recognize when you might still need that part to take over. You weren't going to call mom and dad as you got older and be like, come to my Harry Potter room and let me talk to you about why I need this. Like, that is never going to happen. You're not going to have other people in your life, like you had mentioned, having relationships outside of that as you got older that probably weren't as healthy. Those are not the people that we let in. So part of this is realizing, it's almost like, again, kind of coming back to what you said, it's that validating, that holding, that bringing that part with you, doing some of that inner healing work, starting to really do the interpersonal processing and recognizing, gosh, the me that's had to exist in this state of survival. I was very much the people pleaser, the take care of everyone person. And that was my response to my trauma, was realizing that I already felt like I was taking up too much space. And I was made to feel that way by some of the responses from family, from other people. Again, similar idea of like, I remember one very specific day that I was told to put a smile on my face and that sort of fake it till you make it, because my family had a party that night. And so they didn't have this space to process the fact that my mom was going back to jail. Like, I'm in this big mood and dealing with all these things. And it was, I've got shit to do tonight and you're going to get in the way. So I kind of need you to just like smile and pretend like everything is fine. And that was a skill that they had done for many years because they learned it. And they're like, well, no, this is working, even though we know it's not. It's not working for them. Even now in their 60s and their 70s, it's still not working for you. And it's okay if you never change it. But now it's recognizing, okay, you people pleased and you took on relationships where people treated you like garbage because it's what you believed you deserved, because old you was never told anything different. Okay, that makes sense. Now let's start to think about what the healing looks like from that. How do we, again, both the inner child and the self now? And then it sounds like what you said is really think about the relationships in our lives and how they're either supporting those shame stories or how they support you taking that control and ownership of your life and being able to show up fully. And as you do that, the shell starts to come off more easily. But it does sound like there's still going to be a willingness, at least, that's required to step into the discomfort, because there's no way to guarantee that someone isn't going to make fun of you or hurt you again or do whatever it is. So it sounds like whether it's sharing your Harry Potter room or telling somebody your story, there is still that degree of vulnerability that's required. But what you've seen is when people do that, it actually brings people together because they're all sort of able to go back to their childlike self, this part of them, that curiosity, that creativity, I think about having had my daughter, it allows you to go back to that. Like, we have a room in our house called the enrichment room, and it's just a room invited for people to play. Like, there's Legos and a piano and different musical instruments and Play-Doh. And I've always got tables out of different sensory things. And yeah, the kids that come over love it, but the adults do too. And they walk in there and they're suddenly building with Legos and they're doing something else. And so it's this idea of that room is only for curiosity, whether it is building, it's making music, it's reading. That is what that room is for. And as it evolves, as she gets older, we keep it that way. And so really, it sounds like I'm doing something similar to what you're describing. I just didn't know I was doing it. And the idea of that being, that wasn't safe for me before. What was safe for me was just crossing things off the list and pretending I'm fine and achieving. And so now sort of shifting that. I'm thinking about this for people listening. They're like, okay, you've convinced me. I need to go back to, me at 12, me at 15, me at 6, me at whatever that is. I'm aware that I need to do that. I'm also aware of the ways that I could heal and kind of move forward and start to shift and just rethink the way that my physical space can be that way of coming out of my head and starting to create spaces for warmth, for comfort, for security, whatever that is. If you were to give people just, okay, here is my next 1% step. Here's the first thing I would suggest you do when we get off this podcast and we're done with this and your brain is swirling and you want to do it all, just start here. What would be the next thing that you would tell them to do?
Like, if they wanted to create their own space?
Honestly, if they just wanted to start any of this work, like if they were like,
any of this,
like, okay, I'm not ready to eat. I don't even know how to do the space yet because I'm just now getting on the point of saying an inner child is a real thing. Like, not me, but like, let's pretend that that's what they're saying. And they're like, okay, so now what? What do I do? Can they start with their space? Do they have to do something else?
Yeah, you do have to start somewhere else. It's interesting that you brought that up because that's one of the new things I'm going to be offering is actually one-on-ones to dive into that. And you can get as vulnerable with me as you like, but it's about really traveling to your inner child. Go back in your memories, in the best and your worst memories, and live through them. And you can do that by sitting on your bed in the quiet and just think. You can have your eyes closed, you can have your eyes open. Sometimes I do better with my eyes open because if my eyes closed then my mind runs too much. So, just kind of sit somewhere calmly and just allow yourself to experience those and don't run from them. Don't hide away. Like, I think acknowledging the fact that like, they're not going to hurt you. They already happened. They're playbacks. Like no one's going to come and grab you and shake you right now, And so give yourself a safe space to do that and go see her, him. And if you cry, you cry. That's okay. Like it'd be a little strange if you didn't, to be honest, man or woman. Get comfortable allowing yourself to feel that and just go find that child self and give them a hug. How does it feel? Can you feel the hug? And like, you're going to feel resistance to it. I did, and you feel like you'll kind of feel like the memory faded and out and you'll kind of like reject it. And it's like, no, like give her a hug and like hug your little girl self or your little boy self. And this, this isn't gender exclusive. This is anybody. And starting with that and allow the happy memories to come back too. What made you feel the happiest? What triggers it? If it was a film, let's say it was a Disney film, and that's what comes up for you, go watch it. How do you feel? How does it make you feel? And if you wanted to do your space, I think it's a great place to start because your home is the one place in the world where people can't hurt you, theoretically, right? It's the one place you have control over what's happening. You go outside, you never know. You get hit by a car, you can run into an asshole, you can, you can have something fall on you. Like there's all kinds of crazy stuff that can happen. A bird can, crap on you. You have no control what happens outside your house. But when you're in your house, you have full control. And just really acknowledging that and playing with that and let that be your safe space. So don't focus. I always tell my clients, I'm like, forget about Pinterest, forget about Instagram, forget about monochrome, forget about white and beige. Like none of that stuff matters. What brings you joy? And so like, I actually take my clients through a questionnaire where I ask them, how do you want to feel in your house? When you walk through the door, what do you want to feel? What do you currently feel? And what do you want to feel? Where do you spend the most time and why? Well, and then I'll kind of take them through a color template. And then through that, I'm able to identify kind of the best colors for their mindset, the best colors for them, tones, lighting, textures. There's a whole science behind it, which is really fascinating to me. But I have guides for that I just kind of give away to help people identify it themselves. That's where I would start.
I love that. And
if you wanted help diving into that, you can always contact me.
Which I think was going to be my next question is, so some people are going to say, great, thank you for not closing the doors and being like, well, you need the key to get in for me to give you the next piece. Because not everybody can take that next step, or maybe they're not ready yet to call another person in because maybe they are kind of in that, gosh, my walls are up and I'm hearing you, but my trust isn't there yet. And there are going to be some people that either as they do it and they get ready, or as they're listening to this right now and they realize they are ready, do want to reach out to you. And so if they did want to do that, it sounds like you're going to be doing more one-on-ones. You're doing some of this other work. What's the best place for them to reach out to and connect with you?
I mean, they can look at some of my Harry Potter stuff on Instagram and message me, but just shoot me an email.
Awesome.
You can say like, hey, I heard you on here. I'm curious about this. I'd like to learn more. I do free consultations in the beginning anyways, where I can talk to you about it and even identify if this is the right step for you, which I think anybody can benefit from, which is why I offer it. But I'm never going to sit here and be like, oh, you need this. Like, no, everyone's different. And I can help guide you in how to make it the most efficient for you. It's a first step. It's a tool. So like, I also want people to understand, like, don't come into this and be like, oh, she's going to fix all my problems. No, I'm not. I'm helping you identify what makes you happy and feel safe so you have a space to address these things.
Right.
And, we see therapists and do all this stuff. We go in this office, but then you're just spit right back out into the world and home. And like, you wonder why things don't stick. Here you go. I'm giving you an extra tool, a tool that I use. It's something that I created because it worked for me and it worked for other people. And that's why I share it.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. And I'll make sure that your email address and links to your Instagram are down in the show notes for people to find that. So I think just making sure if you're hearing this, everyone, again, remember all of these episodes are designed to kick up what I call your brain pond. And so it's nice if we just kind of keep things calm and we go about doing whatever our predictable cycle of existing is. And we know on some level it feels like shit, it's unfulfilling, but we keep doing it because it's predictable. And then you listen to one of these episodes and you're like, fuck, you kicked it all up and everything is murky and muddy and I don't know what to do. So first thing is to just go take a second and let it settle back down for a minute. Just noticing how you feel, allowing things to resettle. And once you find sort of that body calmness come back, now go back in and kind of take a look and be like, gosh, what do I notice did get shifted around? What am I willing or ready to pick up? And a really good friend of mine told me a long time ago that when she hears me speak, she thinks about it like a buffet. And so instead of having to get all of it and take all of it every time, she's like, I can come back again. I can go back up there. You can listen to this episode again. She's like, I just pick one thing each time. I just take one thing I'm going to work on. And so if for you, it is this idea of just sitting in a place and giving yourself a hug, if it's even just validating that you have an inner child or that you had shit experiences growing up that sometimes didn't feel good, start there. If it is starting to think about maybe doing some of this deeper work or setting up a consult, then reach out to Cassandra. But whatever that 1% is, remind yourself you don't have to know it right away. And we don't have to fix all of this or do all of this or manage all of this or whatever your shame brain is telling you to do to be okay. We're just acknowledging that this is here. This is a process. This is a lifelong journey. And there are people like Cassandra and I here to support you if and when that feels helpful in that process. Cassandra, I think this is wonderful. I'm super pumped. As you were talking, I think I know what we need to do for part 2. I think you doing some of those questions with me. I wonder if it would be interesting for people to hear what it's like for someone to go through some of those things, because I think you could pick up on stuff that, again, and you know this, I'm like, oh, sure, I know these things. That doesn't mean I do. And so when someone else can come in and kind of call something out of you that you're like, well, no, but I did, what? Huh? And you realize it's there, it can be so powerful. And so I think people getting a chance to experience some of your magic, because it's clear as you're like dancing around and telling us about what you do and why, how powerful it is. And so I wonder what it would look like for people to get a chance to see what your coaching actually looks like and how deep you can go with people.
I think that's a good idea. I think that you could be a very good sample if you're open to it. You've already shared a little bit about it, and I think your space should be your bedroom.
There we go.
And I have ideas for you already, just based off a little bit I know about you, but it would be fun to dive in deep, and you're a little bit more used to being more vulnerable, so I know you're more willing. For anybody here who's listening and interested in that, I mean, I'm one person who's experienced this. I know there's like a lot of fear because you don't know me. I will create an environment where there's mutual trust and vulnerability there, and your stuff won't get shared. I follow HIPAA protocols. Nothing gets shared. It is completely safe with me. And I was thinking, I know we're closing up, but there's a couple things that came up for me that I think might be coming up for people, and I wanted to touch on it just really quick. Just kind of any limiting beliefs, right? Some kind of no's that are popping up in your head, like maybe you're a parent and you need to be focusing on your kid and not yourself. That is untrue. You and your children can benefit from these spaces together, separately. You don't need to have children to do it. You can do it just for your children, even if you don't feel like you need it. This is accessible for any age group. And there doesn't have to be this excessive trauma attached to it either. So I really want to encourage people to give themselves the permission to allow themselves to tap into their childlike creativity, because it's a beautiful thing. And if you really think about it, when you're a child, it's when your brain is its most pure and imaginative. And the only reason you aren't like that today is because of other people's self-limiting beliefs and society telling you not to do these things and to shy away from them. Everything that you have now is super restricted. So why not go back to that super open, creative mind? And I think more people should allow themselves to do that. The other thing is earlier we were talking about how finding the right people to trust to bring in that space. another thing that I wanted to touch on is to remember you have control over that, right? That's what we're talking about. That means you get to control how much people know about that space. I don't introduce my space to everybody as I was beaten as a child, and so I imagined I was in Harry Potter, so now I brought this to life. No, like even my partner and I have been together for 2 years, he's still learning things about me. And it's not a lack of trust with him, but it's just my natural flow of things, and things slowly come up because I don't want to overwhelm him, and I don't always want to talk about it, and just sometimes when it comes up. But I let people just come in and just see it. And they know me, at this point, like if they're coming into your space, they know who you are. Right. They know, naturally your little childhood quirks come up. I'm very giggly and imaginative and creative, and people know this about me. So it's not that shocking for me to have a space like that in my house. People are like, man, this checks out. Before that, I would have themed movie nights where I would make like Harry Potter themed snacks. And it's because I wanted to be in that world so much. And now that I created the room, I feel less of a need to do that. But when I do, it's really fun because then you're really in the space. But just I remember that you don't have to share everything about it. That can just be yours because it is your space. And people seeing it, let it be to them what it is to them naturally.
I love that.
It doesn't have to be you.
I think that the thing that you just said that's key is because I think for many of us, once we put something out in the open, you can't take it back. So like once you've told somebody something, you can't untell them. No. And I think for many people, the fear is when I put this out there, I don't have control over it anymore. The story is no longer mine. And so I think really recognizing we're not writing a tell-all book and then sending it to everybody in your life. You can do that if that is what is in alignment with your healing process. What we're talking about is creating spaces that, people will get a chance to connect with you in them more, but that doesn't mean we're giving away your whole story or that we're telling every detail, and realizing that, especially as you do some of the work, it'll feel maybe less and less important that all those details are shared and talked about. I know, at least for me, again, when I would swing on the pendulum, it was like I needed everybody to know everything and or nothing. Now it's like things do come out, and they come out naturally when they're meant to. And as I've done the work, it's less important that everybody knows all of those details, as I have figured out how to integrate that inner child and do some of that healing work. It's less important. So when I let people in, they're getting a chance to maybe know how I've developed, how I've evolved in my life without necessarily knowing every detail in the journey and how I got there. And so
absolutely,
I love this. I think there's so much for people here. Again, just as you're coming to this, taking that one piece with you, knowing that you can come back and listen to this episode as often as you want to, that Cassandra is here ready to connect with you when you're ready and interested to reach out to her. This has been amazing. Cassandra, thank you so much. I'm excited. I think it's going to be a really fun part 2 when we bring that on. And so I'm super, super pumped about that.
I'm excited too.
And for everybody else, I will see you back here next Sunday.